The courtroom in the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. was wrapped in a thick, heavy quiet as Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, pushed through the big wooden doors. Her hand clutched the leash of Bruno, a German shepherd with a rough, jagged scar stretching along his left side. Every head in the room turned her way as she walked to the middle, her steps a mix of caution and determination. Bruno, cool but alert, stayed right by her side, his ears up like he was ready to catch anything weird. Karoline wasn't just any witness. She was the White House voice, there to keep an eye on the trial of Victor Grayson, a former Pentagon guy accused of passing secrets to China. Her job was to make sure nothing sensitive slipped out, but there was a big question hanging in the air. Could she spot something everyone else had overlooked? Drop a comment with where you're tuning in from, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next update. Judge Daniel Harper, a legal pro with a streak of silver in his hair, leaned in a bit, watching Karoline with a steady, sharp look. He knew this case was a big deal for national security, a mess tied to President Donald Trump's administration. Across the room, Victor Grayson sat at the defendant's table, his face oddly calm, almost cocky. At 50, he'd been a low-key military analyst before, but now he was in hot water, suspected of handing over national secrets to a foreign power. Grayson got nabbed after a tip about a shady meetup with Chinese contacts, but his defense was tight. No hard proof, no admission, and his lawyers were ready to tear apart every claim. Then something wild happened. As Karoline settled into her spot, her bright green eyes locked onto Grayson's. Her fingers shook just a little as she made a small, hidden move, a signal only someone with serious training would pick up. It was the sign she'd worked out with Bruno, a dog trained under the Trump administration to sniff out bugs or odd vibes. Only two in the room caught it, Bruno and Judge Harper. Bruno reacted fast. When Karoline's fingers brushed the table in a quiet order, the dog's body went stiff, ears sharp, muscles tight like he was about to jump. A low rumble came from his chest, a sound that warned and unsettled at the same time. His golden brown eyes zeroed in on Grayson, steady and intense. A shiver ran through the courtroom, whispers spreading among the crowd. Bruno wasn't just acting like a trained pup. There was something raw, almost wild, in how he moved. Judge Harper banged his gavel hard, the noise bouncing off the walls. "Court's taking a 15-minute break," he said, his voice firm and unusually rushed. Prosecutor Anna Reynolds gave him a confused glance, but Harper didn't bite. He just looked at Karoline, who stood next to Bruno like the dog was her rock. Something big had gone down, and he needed a minute to think it over. As people filed out, Harper stayed put, his brain spinning. In all his years as a judge, he'd never seen a dog act so sure of itself. What had Bruno picked up, and what did it mean for the case? Out in the hallway, Karoline dropped to her knees next to Bruno, her hand digging into his fur. Margaret Leavitt, her mom, crouched down too, brushing her daughter's hair with shaky fingers. "You okay, sweetie?" she whispered. Karoline didn't say anything, didn't need to. Her grip on Bruno got tighter, her body leaning into him like she was looking for some calm. A few feet off, FBI agent Ethan Brooks watched it all. A pro investigator, Brooks had a gut feeling that had cracked plenty of big cases. Right now, that gut was screaming that the courtroom moment was a game changer. He stepped up to Judge Harper, keeping his voice low. "I'd bet anything Bruno caught something weird about Grayson." Judge Harper let out a slow breath, his deep blue eyes narrowing, zeroing in on the truth. "Then we've got to figure out what it is," he said, his tone rock solid. In the defendant's private room, Victor Grayson sat across from his lawyer, Thomas Reed. Alone now, the smug look on Grayson's face faded, swapped for something cold and sharp. His fingers tapped nonstop on the wooden table, his mind running back over the courtroom scene. Karoline hadn't said a word, but that dog had reacted. "She knows something," Grayson muttered. Grayson muttered under his breath, and Thomas Reed raised an eyebrow. "What?" Grayson forced a weird grin. "Nothing," he said, but his head was spinning. That dog, he hadn't seen it coming, and now he realized Bruno could be the thing that unravels everything he'd planned. As the 15-minute break wound down, Judge Harper straightened his robe and took a slow breath. He didn't buy into random luck, and his instincts told him Bruno had just dropped a major hint. For the first time since the trial kicked off at the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., he felt the tide turning. The courtroom hummed with nerves as everyone shuffled back in. Victor Grayson, the ex-Pentagon guy accused of spying for China, sat still at the defendant's table, but a tiny spark of worry flickered in his eyes. Prosecutor Anna Reynolds geared up to keep questioning, but all eyes locked on Karoline Leavitt, the White House spokesperson, and Bruno, the German shepherd with that long scar down his left side. Bruno wasn't your average pup. He'd been trained by the Trump administration to pick up on bugs, explosives, and odd behavior. Him being there wasn't just for show. It was a hush-hush security move Karoline had pushed for. Anna Reynolds stepped up, her voice clear and steady. "Your Honor, we've got proof Mr. Grayson was in touch with Chinese contacts for months, leaking classified Pentagon info." She slid a pile of papers forward, but Thomas Reed jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor," he said slickly. "This is all guesswork, no audio, no pictures, just shaky witness accounts." Karoline, sitting close to the prosecution to watch over sensitive details, tilted her head, eyeing Grayson. She caught something off. His fists tightened when Reed brought up recordings. She'd seen that kind of stress in tough White House moments. Without missing a beat, she tapped her fingers lightly on the table, a quiet signal she'd drilled into Bruno over years. Bruno reacted right away. He leaped up, ears perked, nose working fast, then zeroed in on the defendant's table, sniffing around Grayson's chair. A low growl rolled out of him, his golden brown eyes glued to the spot under the table. Whispers rippled through the courtroom crowd. Judge Harper smacked his gavel, his face hard. "What's going on, Miss Leavitt?" he demanded, his tone sharp. Karoline stood, her voice cool but firm. "Your Honor, Bruno's trained to spot listening devices. I think there's something here we haven't noticed." Ethan Brooks, posted by the door, moved quick. He crouched next to Bruno, checking where the dog was focused. Under Grayson's table, he pulled out a tiny black gadget, coin-sized, with a faint red light blinking. "A listening device," Brooks called out, his voice cutting through the courtroom's stunned silence. Grayson's face went pale, his hands shaking. Judge Harper slammed his gavel again, loud and final. "Court's done for now. I want this whole place checked top to bottom," he said, his cold stare locked on Grayson. Anna Reynolds shot Karoline a look, half amazed, half impressed, while Thomas Reed leaned in, talking fast to his client. Karoline stood steady, her hand resting easy on Bruno's head, her eyes sharp with quiet confidence. As Judge Daniel Harper's gavel rang out, the security crew at the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., jumped into gear. Ethan Brooks, still holding the small listening device from under Victor Grayson's table, passed it to a tech nearby. He turned to Judge Harper, his voice solid. "We need to break this thing down ASAP." With graying hair and sharp brown eyes, Brooks was a seasoned FBI agent in the counter-espionage game, chasing shadows in global plots for years. He mumbled low, "I've seen this tech before. Chinese, no doubt." His partner, Olivia Bennett, stepped up next to Karoline Leavitt, who stayed calm beside Bruno. Olivia's voice was quiet but sure. "Miss Leavitt, did you catch anything off before you signaled?" Karoline gave a small nod, her hand light on Bruno's head to keep him chill. Grayson tensed up when the prosecutor mentioned recordings. "He wasn't acting like he did before," she said, her tone smooth and clear, showing her White House press secretary cool under pressure. Olivia and Ethan swapped a quick look. "Body language," Olivia whispered. "He's hiding something." Prosecutor Anna Reynolds walked over, gripping her files, her eyes lit with focus. "If that device was active, it might have picked up everything in here. Stuff Grayson didn't want us catching," Anna Reynolds said, her voice lifting with a hint of excitement. Ethan shook his head, rubbing his forehead. "We need more than that. A listening device by itself won't pin him to China, not without hard data tying it to Grayson." Anna glanced at Karoline. "You sure Bruno only locked onto that device?" Karoline cracked a small smile. "Bruno's trained to spot anything off. Devices, explosives, even weird vibes. If he reacted, it's not just about that one thing." Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, a surprise witness stepped up. Helen Parker, a retired Pentagon worker who used to report to Grayson, walked over to Ethan, her voice steady. "I heard about the dog. I've got something. I saw Grayson in the Pentagon parking lot passing something to a stranger. Couldn't tell what, but the other car's plate started with XJR. Ethan's eyes sparked. "That's a solid lead," he said, scribbling it down fast. Helen nodded. "I kept quiet before. I was nervous. But if he's really spying, I can't just sit on this." Back in the hallway, Karoline stood with Bruno, running her hand gently through his fur. She felt the weight of it all. This wasn't just a trial. It was about keeping the country safe, a job the White House had handed her. Bruno glanced up, his golden brown eyes steady and loyal. "We'll figure it out, buddy," she whispered, though deep down, she knew Grayson wasn't in this alone. That device was just the start. Inside the FBI's temp office in the courthouse, Ethan called in the tech crew to crack open the device. The room smelled clean, like hand sanitizer, and buzzed with the sound of gear clanking on the table. Bruno, the German shepherd with the long scar down his left side, had been one of the best in national security. Trained by a special team under the Trump administration, he could pick up on stuff people couldn't see. That scar came from a brave move. He'd once taken down a suspect in a raid, getting banged up bad but finishing the job. After that, with his movements slowed, he almost got retired. But Karoline fought to keep him as her right-hand partner. Ethan peeked at Bruno, then at Karoline through the glass door. "That dog's more than a buddy," he muttered to Olivia. "He's our ace in the hole." Olivia nodded. "And Karoline knows how to play him. If Grayson's a spy, Bruno's the one who'll sniff him out." Bruno had nearly been sidelined after getting hurt in an anti-terror gig, until Rachel Morgan stepped in. She was an animal training pro with the National Security Unit, running a program for dogs in big-stakes missions. When she heard about Bruno, she pushed hard to keep him, betting on his smarts and loyalty. Now, at the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., that bet was paying off. Karoline Leavitt stood in the FBI's temp office just off the courtroom, gripping Bruno's leash tight. The German shepherd with the scarred left side sat chill beside her, ears up, golden brown eyes scanning everything with quiet focus. Rachel Morgan walked in, dropping to Bruno's level, her voice soft but solid. "Hey Bruno, you're one of a kind, huh? Trained to catch what we miss." Bruno didn't budge, just stared back, calm and steady. "Want to test him?" Rachel asked, looking at Karoline. Karoline nodded, her eyes sharp. "He reacted in the courtroom. If something's off, he'll find it." Rachel gave Bruno a quiet search command. The dog got up fast, nose working the air, then padded slowly toward a corner of the room. Karoline watched, her pulse picking up as Bruno stopped near a chair, nose close to the floor. Rachel tipped her head at Karoline. "Ready? Give the signal." Karoline tapped her fingers lightly on the table, the secret cue she and Bruno had worked on forever. Bruno kicked into gear right away, dipping his head and moving slow but sure toward the chair. As his nose brushed the chair's leg, he froze, ears perked, then let out a low growl. Ethan Brooks, standing close by, hustled over. He knelt, following Bruno's lead, and fished out a tiny object tucked under the chair's cushion. Not a listening device, but a small signal transmitter. "This is high-tech stuff. Encrypted," Ethan said, his voice edged with surprise. "It could have been beaming info out without us even knowing," Anna Reynolds, the prosecutor, said as she stepped into the room, holding a stack of files. Her eyes lit up at the new discovery. "This is the proof we've been waiting for," she added, her voice shaky with a rush of hope. "If Grayson was using this in the courtroom, every story he spun could have gone straight to his crew." Ethan nodded, though he stayed careful. "We've got to check its data. If it links back to China, he's got nowhere to hide." Karoline stood quiet, running her hand gently over Bruno's head, feeling that special connection. Ever since the Trump administration paired her with Bruno, she'd known he wasn't just a dog. He was a key part of her job, keeping the country safe. Bruno glanced up at her like he totally got what was at stake. Over the next few days, Karoline and Bruno were glued together. She didn't lean on him to get over anything personal. He was her extra eyes and ears, always on the lookout for stuff the bad guys tried to keep under wraps. One afternoon in Rachel's office, Karoline watched Bruno nail a search command. "Nice work," she whispered, her voice so low you could barely hear it. Ethan, standing close by, turned, caught off guard seeing Karoline let a little feeling slip. She gave a small smile, her eyes shining with confidence in him. Rachel put a hand on Ethan's shoulder, keeping her voice low. "She counts on him, and sometimes that's what it takes to get to the bottom of things." The courtroom vibe turned heavy again when the trial kicked back into gear. The seats were crammed with reporters, government folks, and legal pros, all on edge for the next big moment in one of Washington, D.C.'s hottest cases. Right in the middle, Victor Grayson sat at the defendant's table, his early swagger now swapped for a nervous vibe you could feel. Karoline and Bruno walked in, ready to tackle whatever came next in this mission to uncover the spying mess. Victor Grayson was parked next to his lawyer at the defendant's table in the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., his face blank and hard to read despite the serious heat on him. Still, the way he held it together was kind of creepy. his fingers tapping steady on the shiny wooden table. Karoline Leavitt, White House press secretary, stood by the prosecution table, holding Bruno's leash like it was part of her job, keeping everything in check. The German shepherd sat sharp beside her, ears up, golden brown eyes fixed on Grayson. Every now and then, Bruno's nose twitched, like he was picking up something he recognized. "Rise!" The clerk's voice cut through the room as Judge Daniel Harper walked in, his black robe swaying a bit behind him. He settled into his high seat, his keen eyes scanning the place before resting on Karoline and Bruno for a second. He'd green-lit Bruno sticking around for the trial, a call some questioned but one he stood by, given the national security angle. "Before we start with opening statements," Harper said, his voice deep and steady, "the court's going to hear arguments about this dog being here." Thomas Reed, Grayson's defense lawyer, stood up, fixing his tie with a smooth move. "Your Honor," he started, polite but firm, "we get that the prosecution says the dog's here to help, but having him around is a problem. A big German shepherd in the room could tug at the jury's feelings and stack things against my client. We'd like him out during testimony." Anna Reynolds, the lead prosecutor, popped up quick to push back. "Your Honor," she said, sounding sure, "Bruno's not just here for looks. He's government trained to spot stuff like bugs or weird behavior. He's got to stay to keep this trial legit, especially with national security on the line." Judge Harper leaned back, his face giving nothing away. "I've looked over the reports from the animal trainer and the security unit. The dog's staying," he said flat out. A buzz rolled through the courtroom. Some folks nodded, others grumbled under their breath. Reed pressed his lips tight, clearly not happy but not about to fight it more. He sat, shooting a quick look at Grayson, who kept his weirdly calm face on. The trial kicked off for real, tension thick in the air. Anna Reynolds laid out a wild story of Grayson's moves, a years-long spy web messing with classified Pentagon info for China. Witnesses stepped up, including Helen Parker, a former Pentagon worker. Her voice shook a bit as she talked about seeing Grayson hand off papers to some stranger in the agency parking lot. "He was acting shady, like he knew someone might be watching," Helen Parker said, her hands locked together tight. Karoline listened, her grip on Bruno's leash tightening now and then, her eyes glued to Grayson. When the room felt heavy, she'd glance down at Bruno, who stayed steady, a solid rock in the middle of this tricky tightrope. Then came the big moment. The courtroom went quiet as Karoline was called up to talk about Bruno's reactions. She stepped to the stand, cool and collected, Bruno right by her side. Anna Reynolds walked up, her voice soft but firm. "Leavitt, we know you're not here as a regular witness, but you and Bruno have changed this case. Can you tell us what went down? A nod or details, whatever works for you." Karoline didn't look at Anna. Her eyes stayed locked on Grayson, her breathing even. Feeling the vibe shift, she tapped her fingers on the stand, the secret signal Bruno knew well. Bruno jumped into action fast. He stood, nose working quick, then darted toward the defendant's table, a low growl rolling out, his eyes fixed on Grayson like he could see right through him. The courtroom went still, and Judge Harper leaned in, his stare intense. Bruno nudged Karoline Leavitt's leg lightly, like he could feel the tension swirling around the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. She bent down, grabbing a handful of his fur, then gave Anna Reynolds a slow nod. "Good," Anna said, keeping her tone gentle but in charge. "Miss Leavitt, what tipped you off to signal Bruno?" Karoline didn't look up right away, her gaze still on Victor Grayson. After a beat, she lifted her hand, pointing straight at the guy across the room. Grayson's face didn't budge, but a quick flash of nerves hit his eyes, his jaw tightening just a bit. Thomas Reed, the defense lawyer, shot up. "Your Honor," he said, sounding rushed, "this is nonsense. Miss Leavitt's not a real witness, and pointing like that doesn't prove anything." Judge Daniel Harper raised a hand, cutting him off. "Objection denied," he said, solid. "The jury can decide what to make of it." Anna kept going, her voice still chill. "Miss Leavitt, did Grayson do anything that made you suspicious?" Karoline didn't say a word. She just made that small hand move again, the signal Bruno knew by heart. The German shepherd snapped to it, ears up, muscles tight, a low growl humming in his chest. It wasn't loud or wild, just a clear heads up. The room jolted. Judge Harper leaned forward, brows creased, while Thomas Reed popped up again, voice sharp. "Your Honor, I object. This is just a show." But Harper didn't bite. His eyes stayed on Bruno, now frozen, all focus on Grayson like he was picking up something only he could sense. It was just like the first time Bruno zeroed in on Grayson. Pure gut instinct, no hesitation. A thought hit Harper, and he turned to Anna, his voice low and steady. "Miss Reynolds, has this dog run into the defendant before?" Anna paused. "Not that I know of, Your Honor." Harper shifted his look to the defendant's table. "Mr. Grayson, you ever crossed paths with this dog?" For the first time, Grayson cracked. His fingers, usually tapping steady, balled into fists. He didn't say a thing, just sat there quiet. Anna's eyes got wide, like she just connected a dot. She spun around, whispering fast to Ethan Brooks, who took off out of the courtroom. "What's happening?" Thomas Reed barked, losing his cool. Anna straightened up, her face blank. "Your Honor, I need a quick break. We might have just stumbled onto something new tied to this case." Judge Harper eyed her for a long second, then nodded. 15-minute recess, he said. As the room cleared out, whispers spread like crazy, everyone guessing hard. What had Bruno clocked about Victor Grayson, and where'd it come from? Harper had a gut feeling the answer was going to flip everything. The heat was on for the prosecution as fresh leads popped up. Victor Grayson was tied to Chinese spying, but the case could fall apart without solid proof. No one saw it coming that the real key wouldn't come from people talking, but from the dog always close to Karoline. The next morning, a cool breeze wrapped around Washington, D.C., as the prosecution, led by Anna Reynolds, brought a new move. "Your Honor," Anna said, sounding sure, "we've checked out the signal transmitter Bruno sniffed out. Its data points to a spot, an old warehouse out in rural Virginia. We need a 24-hour break to check it out. We think this is the last piece to wrap this up," Anna Reynolds said. Thomas Reed jumped in fast. "Your Honor, this is just a stall move. My client's been grilled plenty and there's no solid proof." Ethan Brooks, near the prosecution table, leaned over to Anna, keeping his voice low. "I've seen this setup before. If Grayson's got a hideout, everything he's been hiding is there." Judge Harper nodded, his face set. "Motion's good. Court's out for 24 hours. Thomas Reed tried again, his tone doubtful. "Dirt samples don't prove much." But Judge Daniel Harper's hard look shut him down. "Motion stands," Harper said, his voice firm. "Prosecution's got 24 hours. Court's done." The gavel hit, and Ethan Brooks and his crew got moving. Bruno, Karoline Leavitt's ever-sharp sidekick, came along for the ride. The way he'd reacted to Victor Grayson in the courtroom was clear as day. Maybe he picked up on something nobody else could catch. The team rolled up to the abandoned warehouse in rural Virginia by early afternoon. The quiet was spooky, with just the wind rustling through the trees around it. A thick layer of dust covered the porch floor, but faint footprints heading to the back door hinted someone had been there lately. Bruno kicked in first as they got close, ears up, nose working hard, body stiff, tail straight, ready to move. A low growl slipped out as he stepped inside, his eyes bright and on high alert. "Something's not right here," Ethan muttered. "Bruno knows there's stuff inside." The team eased in, staying careful, hands ready. The warehouse looked empty. A table, a folding cot, some stacked up empty food cans in the corner. But then Ethan spotted something weird. The wooden floor by the back wall had a strange line, a little dip that didn't fit. He tapped it, hollow. "There's something under this," he said, his voice steady. The team popped the plank up quick, and what they found froze them. A tight staircase winding down to a hidden basement. The air turned chilly and damp as they headed down, a weak light showing a wild setup. Old gadgets, computer drives, torn-up papers, and a small, locked safe tucked in the corner. Bruno pulled at his leash, letting out a quiet whine, like he could feel how big this was. Ethan moved fast, cracking the safe open with a tool. Inside was an encrypted hard drive and a pile of papers, code names, dates, deals spelling out military info handed off to China. "This is it," Ethan said, his voice shaky with a rush. "We've got straight-up proof on Grayson." He gripped the hard drive, knowing this spy mess was close to over, even if there was still more to figure out. Back at the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., word of the find spread fast. The courtroom was jammed as Anna Reynolds got ready to hit Victor Grayson hard. Judge Harper let the new stuff, the hard drive, papers, and signal transmitter data Bruno had sniffed out, go on record. "Mr. Grayson," Anna said, her voice cutting sharp, "how do you explain classified Pentagon docs tied right to you in that warehouse?" For the first time, Grayson cracked. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stumbled out. Anna stepped closer, not letting up. "Your prints are on the safe. Your tire marks match the ones outside, and best of all, This hard drive's gonna spill your whole spy web." Her words dropped heavy in the room, a solid piece of proof that could bust Grayson's walls. His cool act started falling apart. Thomas Reed leaned in, whispering something fast, but Grayson was boxed in. Then it happened again. Bruno, chilling at Karline's feet, snapped his head up, eyes narrowing at Grayson. His fur stood up, a deep growl humming in his chest. The room went quiet as the German shepherd stepped forward slow, his stare locked on the defendant, a look like he knew him cold. Grayson flinched hard, the guy who'd stayed cocky all trial now sweating, hands clutching the table's edge. He turned to Reed, muttering something wild, then whispered, "I want to switch my plea." The room exploded with noise. Harper's eyes went dark. "Mr. Grayson, you saying you want to plead guilty?" Everyone held their breath. Grayson let out a shaky sigh. "Yeah." The trial cut off quick, sending shock ripples everywhere. Victor Grayson got hit with life without parole nationwide, a traitor's fate locked in. But the real star of the show wasn't just the lawyers or the investigators. It was Karoline Leavitt, who leaned on her smarts and Bruno to keep national security tight. After the verdict, she ran her hand over Bruno's head, whispering, "Thanks, buddy." Bruno wagged his tail, nudging up against her, a sign of a bond that wouldn't break, ready to take on whatever came next, no matter how tough. The story, Karoline Leavitt's secret signal to her dog, Judge Harper's courtroom, and that jaw-dropping quiet, ties into real stuff going on in America today, like worries about national security, trust, and tech, plus how working together can tackle big risks. In the tale, Karoline Leavitt, White House press secretary, teamed up with Bruno to bust Victor Grayson's spy game at the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. The listening device and the hard drive full of classified docs they found in that Virginia warehouse aren't just made-up bits. They echo real spy messes like Edward Snowden's leaks or claims of foreign meddling in elections. The U.S. right now deals with the same kind of headaches: info slips, data breaches, and outside threats messing with democracy. The takeaway here isn't just staying sharp against troublemakers, it's about leaning on unexpected help like Bruno, trained to catch stuff people miss. When Karoline gave that quiet signal, and Bruno sniffed out the signal transmitter, it showed how human know-how mixed with a dog's special skills can make something unbeatable. In real-life America, it's a nudge not to sleep on the little things. Could be a buddy, a handy gadget, or just a gut feeling. Ethan Brooks and Anna Reynolds pairing up with Karoline to scope out the warehouse also shows teamwork, a big American vibe where sticking together often beats the odds. Here's some straight-up advice. Sharpen your own lookout skills like Karoline, always ready to move when something feels off, like she did when Grayson got twitchy. At the same time, build a crew you can count on, whether it's coworkers, family, or a trusty dog like Bruno. In a time of twisted info and sneaky risks, mixing your own quick thinking with backup from your people can keep you on top, not just scraping by. Exactly how Karoline and Bruno shielded national security from Grayson's plot. Keep in mind, even in the tightest spots, a small move like Karoline's finger tap can flip the whole deal. Thanks for sticking with Karoline Leavitt and Bruno's wild ride to uncover a spy scheme. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more intense stories. Catch you in the next one, where we'll keep digging into mysteries and lessons from today's America.
This is an artistic and fictional creation intended for both entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual people or events is purely coincidental. Some scenes and dialogues in the video are part of a dramatized performance and incorporate elements of grotesque, satire, and exaggeration. The creator stands against discrimination, violence, and hatred. This channel fully complies with YouTube's policies and does not infringe upon copyright laws.